I think that the best way to start this segment is to maybe start with a clip of Little Narco Rubio, although some people might call him Marco Rubio. He is unfortunately the Secretary of State. He had some words yesterday. So let's go ahead and play that clip.
But as we speak, the ICC and its friends are waging a war against our country, not with bullets or missiles, but with statutes and compacts and the force of so-called international law. When the ICC was born 24 years ago, they told us that it was merely a narrow backstop, a global court that would step in to prosecute only the gravest offenses, things like genocide and war crimes, and only when a nation's courts were unable to prosecute them on their own. But the truth is, it was something far more radical and extreme. It was a global tribunal staffed by unelected globalist bureaucrats who claim their power is almost unlimited. The danger of this global court has only continued to grow. Today, it threatens every aspect of our political and legal system. Border Patrol agents removing violent criminals from our country, American Marines risking their lives to defend our homeland, prosecutors working to dismantle terrorist plots to attack and kill Americans. If we stand idle, all of them would be at the mercy of foreign judges thousands of miles away, facing the constant risk of prosecution and even imprisonment for the so-called crime of defending their own country. This administration will not sit by as the ICC and its allies seek to threaten our people. If they believe they can deprive us of our sovereignty, we will teach them the full meaning of American resolve.
So there you have it, folks. Little Narco Rubio has literally launched a campaign to dismantle the International Criminal Court. This is the rationale provided by the State Department's release about why the campaign is being launched. It echoes some of what Rubio said. I'm just going to read from it in my State Department voice. The ICC poses an intolerable threat to U.S. sovereignty. It claims the authority to prosecute and even imprison American servicemen and officials operating on behalf of America's national interest. America never signed up for this, and all American presidents since the ICC's ratification have maintained that the ICC does not have jurisdiction over American. So the ICC previously opened an investigation into U.S. servicemen and intelligence officers and has since refused to close those cases. The ICC now seeks to become the unaccountable global arbiter, positioning itself above and beyond the nation state as a supranational enforcement arm of the globalist bureaucracy. Sorry, I can't not laugh. Empowered to persecute American servicemen and officials at will. No diplomatic option will be off limits in the campaign to dismantle the threat posed by the ICC to Americans. So that's it. Wants to dismantle the ICC. That's completely laughable in so many ways, and we're going to get into it. To discuss all of this, we are joined by human rights attorney Craig Mokhiber. Craig, thank you so much for joining us here at BT Live.
Great to be with you both again. Thank you.
I mean, it's great to be with you, but what a just cartoonishly absurd, but also very dangerous campaign. So I want to start off by talking about what happened here. Was this at all expected to happen? The U.S. is not, by the way, even party to the ICC, which the State Department declaration mentions, nor does it recognize the jurisdiction of the ICC over U.S. soldiers and citizens. In fact, the U.S. even has the Hague Invasion Act. If you haven't heard of that, it's meant to protect Americans from arrest and literally gives the U.S. the right to invade The Hague if they ever try to. So why even go this far and move to dismantle something you've never been a part of and that you wouldn't even abide by anyway?
Well, obviously, if Marco Rubio's lips are moving, he is lying. That was there a whole series of lies and distortions designed really as the usual smokescreen, using fascistic language like the globalists are coming to get us. And, he says so-called international law, which is a signal of the attitude of impunity that the Trump administration has, that somehow, international law is so-called international law. They're unbound by it. And certainly they behave as if they are unbound by any of the rules of international law. This has been a truly murderous regime from the very start. But it has nothing to do with the claims that Marco Rubio is making there. Yes, there is an old case file that was open to look at some of the torture and murder perpetrated by U.S. troops and intelligence actors in Afghanistan and in Iraq. But that case has gone nowhere. What this really is a reaction to efforts by the International Criminal Court to hold the Israeli regime accountable. And as you know, the U.S. government with this administration is a wholly owned subsidiary of the Israeli regime. The empire at this moment is being driven in both directions. We shouldn't be, I think, deceived by this claim that this is an action to protect U.S. sovereignty, as he's tried to do. First, international tribunals are not a threat to sovereignty. They are duly constituted in international law. They are expressions of sovereignty because they're set up by states in acts of sovereignty. States negotiate treaties, they join international organizations, they consent to be bound because they get something out of having an international order that is affected by the rule of law to some degree. And nowhere is this more clear than in cases of war crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide, and aggression, which is the only remit of the International Criminal Court. They don't deal with any other sorts of crimes. And by the way, the International Criminal Court, it doesn't threaten sovereignty because it doesn't work to hold states accountable. It's an individual criminal responsibility mechanism. It tries individuals who perpetrate crimes. It does nothing more than that. So these are all distortions trying to make us look the other way at the reality of what the U.S. is trying to do now is to protect Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant and others who are under consideration for indictment by the International Criminal Court, even as they perpetrate a genocide. And that has been made clear by a whole series of acts and statements made by the United States ever since these announcements were made of the indictments of Netanyahu and Gallant, and even before, when the investigations were taking place. These indictments of Netanyahu and Gallant, they sent the U.S. into an absolute fury, threatening the International Criminal Court, its judges, its officials, its prosecutor, cooperating witnesses. They issued a series of unlawful U.S. sanctions against the prosecutor and the judges and those cooperating with the International Criminal Court. I mean, this is real mafia-like behavior. And even before the warrants were requested, a dozen U.S. senators, including Lindsey Graham, not surprisingly, sent this threatening letter to the ICC prosecutor declaring in the language of schoolyard bullies, and this is a quote, "Target Israel and we will target you. You have been warned," unquote. So that's what this really is. And remember that this administration, in defense of Israeli impunity, has already withdrawn from the UN Human Rights Council. It's attacked UN agencies like UNRWA and others. It's imposed a whole series of sanctions against the prosecutor, the judges, Francesca Albanese, the UN Special Rapporteur on Palestine, the most prominent Palestinian human rights organizations. And as you mentioned, it even had gone so far under a previous administration to adopt this so-called Hague Invasion Act, allowing the U.S. Military to act against the Netherlands, where the court sits, to spring any indicted war criminals who happen to be Israelis or U.S. citizens. This is, in the first instance, that to protect Israel. And on the other side, I have to mention, Ronnie, it is also a part of a larger assault by this administration on international law itself.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you kind of called it this mafia-esque response, because it really does kind of elicit that comparison when you know there's the threat of kind of justice being, having to pay for their crimes, and you kind of go and use any means necessary. And even in that statement by the State Department, they say no diplomatic option will be off limits in the campaign to dismantle this threat. So it's really threatening language, and they even have the grounds for threatening behavior and military action. But, we of course have seen Israel constantly talk about the ICC and how it's all a load of whatever. They've, since day one, they've been saying that the ICC is corrupt and they won't abide by its mandate, et cetera. But what has been the reaction from other countries? Is this announcement by Marco Rubio at all popular? And do you think that this call to dismantle the ICC will get any support beyond the U.S. and Israel?
Well, sadly, I have to say, given what's been happening here, so you have this larger effort to dismantle not just the ICC but the entire post-World War II system of international law, because the U.S. and Israel, this axis that is, cutting a bloody course across all of Western Asia, the Caribbean, Latin America, and so on, they're trying to remove any final constraints on the exercise of their raw power. Part of that has been this broad daylight violations of the highest rules of international law, the rules against aggression, against genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, assault and murder on the high seas, assassinations, kidnapping of foreign leaders, all of these things that are clear and obvious violations of international law. They are perpetrating in broad daylight, not just to achieve the immediate ends in those cases, but to declare to the world that international law does not apply to them and therefore is effectively dead. The same reason that they've gone after all of these international organizations with smear campaigns, withdrawals, budget cuts, attempts to dismantle these international organizations like UNRWA, the World Health Organization, the Human Rights Council, and so on, attacking rapporteurs, establishing the so-called Board of Peace as a kind of dictatorial imperial body to replace the United Nations, right? All of this is a part of this broader campaign. What has the world done, to answer your question, right? Mm-hmm. There has been an absolute failure of a principled response from other states, and that has, encouraged the impunity both of the U.S. and of the Israeli regime to try more and more in this direction until it will become too late. And if states don't stand up, this pillar of international law will fall, but so will all of the others, one after another, that are already under attack. The world has tools to fight back. The ICC itself has its Article 70 in the Rome Statute that would allow it to criminally prosecute anyone who impedes or seeks to intimidate or influence an official of the court, or anyone who retaliates against the court or any of its officials for its duties. And the interesting thing about this Article 70 is that it doesn't only apply to parties to the Rome Statute, to parties to the International Criminal Court. It can be applied against anyone. And in fact, the prosecutor has warned, when he issued the indictments against Netanyahu and Gallant, he warned that he revealed that he was being pressured and the court was being pressured, and he warned that they might use Article 70 to bring charges against some of these individuals. And you can face 5 years in prison for this. And then beyond Article 70, the ICC is an international organization, as legal personality in international law. It's allowed to take countermeasures when it's being attacked. And the U.S. and the Israelis are very clearly attacking it. The ICC is located in the Netherlands. Netherlands is a party to the Rome Statute, and they're responsible for the security of the court. So any action that the U.S. were to take against it would also be an act against the Netherlands, and they could take action. There are things like EU blocking statutes that could be mobilized when the U.S. tries to impose these kinds of sanctions, but so far the EU has refused to do so. There are mechanisms in the UN General Assembly that could get around a U.S. veto and take action to hold the U.S. accountable for these actions, to protect the court, and to protect the targets of these unlawful activities by the United States. There are 125 states parties to the ICC who are obliged to defend the court. They could take action individually and collectively to impose diplomatic and economic and other cost on the U.S. for these sorts of activities. None of them have done so, despite everything that has happened so far. And if they don't act soon, I think it's highly unlikely that the post-war legal system will even survive. And that is the objective of the U.S.-Israel axis at this moment.
It has been over 2 years, Craig, since the International Court of Justice heard the case against Israel, accusing it of genocide. And then it's been a little less than 2 years since the ICC issued arrest warrants against top Israeli leaders. So that I think raises the question of what is the purpose of these international jurisdictions if they have still been unable to stop the genocide underway?
Well, the ICC and the ICJ have both been under continuous attack since these cases began. So much to the shame of the ICC, the prosecutor dragged his feet for a very long time. Previous prosecutors and the court itself dragged their feet for a decade, effectively, on the Palestine case. But ultimately, under Karim Khan, they did bring these arrest warrants out. And the minute that they did, they were attacked very forcefully by Israeli and U.S. intelligence agencies, by Israel proxy groups, by the government of the United States with sanctions. The court is effectively unable to function now. I mean, they can't have email or health insurance or budgets, or they're being sanctioned in ways that are designed to prevent them. This is textbook obstruction of justice on steroids that has been brought to bear, and it's working in delaying action. It hasn't shut the court down, but what will, and the ICJ with the genocide cases also faced these kinds of threats and delays. Now, who is supposed to defend these mechanisms? It is the other member states. And one of the really disgraceful things about the genocide of the last few years and the serial aggression by the Israeli regime and the U.S. against Lebanon and Iran and Yemen and elsewhere, and the U.S. in Latin America as well, is the fact that the broader community of states, which have obligations under international law to act, have declined to take any action or in any meaningful way to threaten this wholesale assault, either to defend the court so that it can continue to function, and they could defend it in some of the ways that I already listed here, by blocking the sanctions, for example, or to hold these governments accountable for their violations of international law. Unless states do so, these institutions will not be able to bear the weight of the U.S.-Israel Axis's attack on them. And that's the hope of the Axis, is that they will collapse under the weight of these attacks. Now, I still think that the jury is out, to use a legal metaphor, that perhaps we will see more action in the coming days. There is a lot of pressure from civil society, from movements, on individual governments to take the action that they need to take to put an end to this rampage by the U.S.-Israel Axis against innocent victims all around the world, but also against international institutions and courts and international law itself. Maybe some of that will bear fruit. There are discussions in the Hague Group, for example, on how to meet their obligations in this regard. There's a lot of pressure on the EU to try to move toward using its blocking mechanisms to protect the special rapporteur, to protect the judges of the court, to protect the NGOs and others who are being targeted. But I think that the Israelis and the Americans are betting that nobody is going to push back, and they're going to continue to expand their assault. These mechanisms do a lot of important work, to answer your question, right? I mean, right now, the Israeli regime, which has enjoyed 80 years of absolute impunity, ensured by the United States of America, the United Kingdom, Germany, a number of Arab governments and others, 80 years of impunity. Today, because of these institutions and those who press these institutions to act, the Israeli regime is on trial for genocide in the International Court of Justice. Its leaders are indicted for crimes against humanity in the International Criminal Court. It has been found to be guilty of unlawful occupation, aggression, racial segregation, apartheid by international bodies. It has absolutely lost the struggle for legitimacy, which has undeniably weakened it and begun to chip away at its impunity. But because the US and Israel recognize that that's what's happening, they are now trying to use brute force to stop the march of justice. And I can tell you that none of these positive developments would have happened without people, without movements from society putting pressure on the UN, pressure on the ICC, pressure on the ICJ, pressure on individual states to form the Hague Group and others. None of those things, the developments would have happened without that pressure, and we still have that pressure in our hands. And so everything that happens from the people, whether it is the student encampments or the people's marches or the people's flotillas, the people's tribunals, all of these sort of things together are buttressing what is left of these institutions and their effort to try to achieve justice and to hold the Israeli regime and ultimately the U.S. empire accountable. I think we need to continue to fight that battle alongside direct action and public protest and boycotts and divestments and sanctions, alongside legitimate armed resistance, alongside all of the things that represent a counterbalance to this bloody rampage being perpetrated by the U.S. Israel axis. And while very imperfect, things like the International Criminal Court, the International Court of Justice, the UN human rights mechanisms, the special rapporteurs, human rights organizations, these are important weapons in our arsenal of justice. And we have every interest in trying to defend and to buttress them and to push them forward, even in the face of these horrific assaults that they are confronting now. So, yeah, I don't want to see them go away. I want to see them prevail. But all of the power that we have in our hands has to be used to push the states in an international legal system where states get the votes and we don't, to do the right thing and to push back on this assault.
No, I think it's an incredibly important point. And before, Craig, we let you go, just wanted to ask, of course, this campaign is barely a day old, but it does promise that no diplomatic option is off the table. And the fact that they said that they're launching a campaign suggests that there will be further actions taken by the United States under the direction of the State Department to kind of carry this forward. So, I mean, you've already mentioned that several individuals of the ICC, I think as well as ICJ, have been sanctioned by the United States. Is that the direction that this is going in? More sanctions? What can we kind of expect the targets really of this campaign to be?
Well, they've laid it out. The amazing thing about the Trump administration is they declare their crimes out loud. And they have long ago pulled back the mask on just sort of raw U.S. imperialism. And so Rubio has promised that they are going to use all of their power to pressure ICC member states to withdraw, which would be the ultimate weakening of the court from the ICC. And no doubt some vassal states of the U.S. will agree to do so. I don't think many will do so. I think that would be the ultimate humiliation, to be given orders by the empire to withdraw from a treaty that a country has voluntarily ratified and that they support. But he has also promised that they will have an intimidation campaign, what they call increased scrutiny, of any states that receive U.S. aid, to force them to reject the authority of the ICC. He's promised visa revocations and travel bans for any ICC personnel. And plenty of ICC personnel are either Americans or have relationships to the United States and so on. And as you mentioned, he's also promised an increase in these unlawful sanctions against the ICC, its personnel, any affiliated organizations. And we've already seen how this works with them attacking the special rapporteur, Francesca Albanese, and attacking prominent Palestinian human rights organizations that cooperate with the court. So, in other words, the Trump administration, acting to protect another oppressive foreign regime that's engaged in genocide and apartheid, and that international bodies want to hold accountable, the Trump administration has now publicly announced an illegal campaign to obstruct justice, to persecute judges and court personnel, to persecute cooperating witnesses and experts. It's all of the gloves are off, and they are no longer hiding the just sort of raw imperialism that they have decided to practice and spread. And it's nothing new. If you look at history, fascism loves law and order, but they despise the rule of law, right? So if you look at Mussolini beginning in 1925, one of the first things they did was to attack the courts, to purge the courts of any judges that might seek to constrain fascist power, to put in loyalists, political courts to punish people. And then the Nazi regime did the same thing as it consolidated power. It purged the courts of any independent judges replaced them with loyal Nazis. Franco, fascist leader in Spain after that in the 1930s, systematically purged the Spanish judiciary of any independent judges, set up military tribunals and political courts. Every authoritarian regime since then, Viktor Orban in Hungary, the Mafia in Italy, have made the targeting of judges and courts a centerpiece of their effort to not just to consolidate power, but to ensure impunity. What's different here is that the Trump administration has now taken this global. That they created a global assault on the rule of law that's not confined to the borders of a particular state. And that means that what they're doing is a threat against all of us.
That's actually like a really important way to put it. It's like that sort of local fascist assault on the courts taken globally. Craig, thank you so much for joining us to break all of this down. Really appreciate all of the excellent work that you do and hope to have you on again soon. Craig Mokhiber, human rights attorney. Really appreciate you.
Always my pleasure. Thanks to both of you.